All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Becky. Thanks to the Riverside Nature Center, and thanks to all of you for having me speak to you all this afternoon about Hillside Stewardship. Again, my name is Daniel Oppenheimer, and I'm the Land Program Manager at the Hill Country Alliance. And I am going to share my screen with y'all.
You got your camera?
Can everyone see my screen all right?
Yes.
All right. Well, let's get going. So again, I work for the Hill Country Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization that works throughout the Texas Hill Country to conserve the things that make this the beautiful place we know and love. And our program areas focus on issues related to land, water, night skies in our communities, and I oversee our land program. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us, you're welcome to check us out at hillcountryalliance.org. So with the land program, we really have two components. We have land stewardship, which is the focus of this afternoon's discussion, and that's where we can work with individual landowners or groups of landowners on on-the-ground practices to improve the health of our land, our water, and wildlife habitat. And then the other aspect to our land program is land conservation, looking for tools and opportunities to protect open spaces and working lands for today as well as future generations. So I have a few hopes for today. Presenters don't always talk about what are their goals, what do they want to accomplish. I have a few hopes for all of us. One is I hope you'll actually learn something new today. I'm going to share with you some tools, some vocabulary that are new to the Hill Country and might even sound a little weird and funny. I hope you'll mull them over and think about them. I hope that after today's discussion, maybe tomorrow when it's cooler out in the morning, you'll go out and walk your property and maybe see things a little differently based on some of the things we discussed this afternoon. And as we talk about hillside stewardship, what we'll really be focusing on is how to slow and sink the water into the land. And while I hope that you'll think about this, I don't want anyone to run out and spend a bunch of money and start moving a bunch of rock and dirt this afternoon. But again, I hope that this will be the start of a journey where you're thinking about things and looking at things a little differently. Those are my hopes for each of us today. So to work towards that goal, here's my outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hill Country, this remarkable and dynamic landscape that we call home. And then we'll talk about hillside stewardship, that relationship to and connection with our uplands and our hillsides. How do we deepen that, our understanding and care for that part of the landscape? We'll talk a little bit about the resources that are available to you to help you do this successfully. And then we'll have an informal discussion. I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of aspects to uplands and hillside stewardship that I'm not going to discuss in the presentation. Everything from grazing management to how we design and maintain our roads to prescribed fire and mowing and so on. While I'm not going to address those important topics during the presentation, if the group wants to address some of those topics during the discussion afterwards, we can certainly go there.
Turn your recliner around if you want to sit on it.
Somebody we can hear some background noise. If you wouldn't mind muting your accounts, that would be awesome. Thank you. So again, the Hill Country, we are really lucky to live in this beautiful, remarkable, and dynamic landscape. Whether you've lived here a day or your whole life, you probably know that we are often referred to as Flash Flood Alley. Based on our topography, our thin soils, and our weather patterns, we are prone to some really devastating floods that happen periodically. These floods can have a high cost of human life, of property, of homes, of public infrastructure, can have all sorts of havoc. And so this is a picture for folks who were around here in 2018. This was the flood of the LANDOWNE River in the fall that ultimately took out the bridge in Kingsland, and then later caused some water quality issues for the folks downstream in Austin. So we have these pretty remarkable and devastating floods that happen from time to time. Likewise, we have some pretty serious droughts. We joke sometimes that if it's not flooding, we're either in a dry period, as we are currently, or we're in a drought. And this picture was taken in that same LANDOWNE River system. Granted, it was upstream, but this was during the drought of 2011. So we see some pretty big swings in the pendulum in terms of dry periods and drought and flood. And then another aspect of living in the hill country is the fact that we live on some pretty remarkable geology. We've got some porous limestone beneath our feet with holes and cracks and fissures and caves, such that a single raindrop can fall from the sky, percolate through the soil, and enter an underground aquifer. That one raindrop can then reemerge through a spring into a creek and then into a river. And as it's taking its course down a creek or a river, can then find another fissure in that bedrock and go back into and recharge the aquifer. And so in the Pedernales River, where I live, for instance, in that river basin, we know that that happens about 10 times in the main stem of the Pedernales, where surface water in 10 or so different places falls back into the groundwater. So again, a really dynamic landscape with periodic floods and drought and this remarkable dynamic connection between the surface and groundwater. And really, the intermediary between these three processes is soil. And when our soils, when we manage those soils to be healthy, they're going to help us slow and sink and store water in a manner that mitigates floods, that holds water in the ground in a way that helps us during dry periods and droughts, in a way that's going to feed our springs and our creeks and our rivers longer over time. And so our soils are key to our living and our quality of life here in the hill country. So let's talk about soil. Perhaps some of you have a bunch, like this property over in Blumenthal, Texas. Maybe you only have a few inches, and maybe you've just crossed your arms because you don't have any at all, and you wish you had several feet of alluvial soils like we're looking at. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about soil, what it is, why it matters. One of the key elements for how we can create and maintain and restore soil is to eliminate bare ground. Perhaps some of y'all know Pete Van Dyke. He lives over near the headwaters of the Blanco River, does a lot of work around soil health and land restoration. And one of his go-to quotes is that bare ground is public enemy number one. And the reason we don't like bare ground, as you see in this picture on the left, is when we have bare ground and a raindrop falls, that single raindrop, when it strikes the ground, is going to mobilize and release particles of sediment. And that can be the start of a much larger process of erosion just by having that bare ground. Perhaps you've seen one of these rainwater simulations like we have on the right side. Typically, these will demonstrate different conditions of land. What we have on the far left here is bare compacted ground. And what you'll see is that the water races off very quickly so that you have A, lots of water running off, and B, look at the color, you're seeing lots of that soil carried off the landscape. By contrast, on the far right, we have a plot of soil that is healthy, that has diverse and abundant grasses growing from it. So you have very little runoff of water and very little erosion of soil being taken off the landscape. Rather, that water is being captured and stored in the soil like a sponge. And so again, one of the first things we want to do is to address public enemy number one, figure out how we can reduce and ideally eliminate bare ground on our properties. And to do that, we really need to understand soil. And there is so much we still do not know. Just as we're learning a lot about the microorganisms in our guts, in our bodies, so too we're learning about this entire world below our feet. And what's central to all this is the connection between the plants that we do see above ground and their relationship with these microorganisms. So when a plant performs photosynthesis, among other things, what it's doing is it's taking energy and releasing carbon-based sugars from its roots into the ground, and in so doing, feeding some of these microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. Those bacteria and fungi, in turn, are providing the plants with things like water and nutrients and other resources. And so you might look at this and say, well, you know, I can't see any of this stuff. I don't even know how to pronounce half these words. So what? Who cares? Well, the reason these things are important, there's actually quite a few reasons, and I'm just going to focus on one or two today, is their ability to create the very structure. When we talk about the soil and the land acting like a sponge, things like bacteria and fungi are critical to creating the very physical structure of the soil. So we have things like bacteria that create something called microaggregates. That's taking land that would otherwise just be sort of compacted and creating these small particles. And then we have fungi creating these larger particles, think like cottage cheese. And together they're creating these larger particle sizes that create porous space for things like for oxygen and for water. And so again, that's creating the sponge, is having this relationship between healthy plants above ground, feeding sugars through photosynthesis to these microorganisms, and having a healthy ecosystem below the ground. And when we do that, when we have healthy soils with minimal bare ground, something pretty remarkable happens. This is a figure from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It says that if we can increase the organic matter, that's things like leaf litter, cow manure, if we can increase organic matter by 1% across 1 acre of land, we can enhance the ability of that land to hold more than 25,000 gallons of water. And so again, we think back to how do we mitigate floods? How do we address floods and flooding, and how do we take care of our creeks and rivers? Well, a big part of that is enhancing the organic matter and taking care of the soil beneath our feet. Now, there are entire books written on how we do this, and I'm just trying to give you a high-level cover today, but there are about 5 different guiding principles for how we improve the health of our soils. The first thing we want to do is to reduce those types of disturbances, physical disturbances like tilling, that are going to disrupt the very physical structure of those microorganisms. The second thing we want to do is maximize soil cover. Again, think back to organic matter. That could be leaf litter, it could be compost, it could be mulch. So we're covering the ground, insulating it from hot temperatures, and feeding those microorganisms. We want to increase the biodiversity, so we don't just want to have grass covering bare ground, but ideally we have a diversity of things like grasses and forbs and shrubs and trees. And then we want to maximize the presence of living roots so that we have photosynthesis happening as much throughout the year as possible. So again, we're having this interchange of sugars from the plants feeding those microorganisms providing the plants with water, nutrients, and other resources, which is to say we want cool and warm season plants growing on our properties as well. And to the extent possible, we want to integrate animals, whether that's with something like rotational grazing, or maybe you can add your neighbor's cow manure or some vermicast, worm castings to your property. There are a lot of different ways that we can enhance our soil health. So for those of you who might have your arms crossed because you don't have several feet of soil, perhaps your place looks a little bit like this. This next section is for you. What if we don't have much soil or any to begin with? Perhaps you've got a hillside that's pretty exposed. We've got a lot of rock and caliche. Well, really, the key to a site like this is finding appropriate site-based strategies for slowing and sinking water. And the reason we want to slow and sink water, if you think back to that raindrop image I showed a couple of slides ago, when that water hits bare ground and it's mobilizing soil particles, it's starting to carry them and start these erosive processes moving down the hillside. If we can slow and sink water, it's going to drop those particles of sediment. And over time, we can get enough sediment deposited so that we can have plants starting to grow. So I'm going to show you a picture. This is from droughtprooftexas.com. Same site. By using a few strategies that we'll talk about this afternoon, they took a site that looks like this and converted it into something like this. And it all starts with slowing and sinking the water on our hillsides. To do that effectively, we first need to understand a little bit about erosion, how it happens, where it starts, and how it advances as it moves down the hill. There's different types of erosion on our hillsides. The first is referred to as splash erosion. Again, think back to that image of that raindrop hitting bare ground, splashing, and mobilizing those particles of sediment. Then we have what's referred to as sheet erosion, and you can see that on the top here, where we have water moving sort of uniformly down the hill. Typically, you have sheet erosion because the ground is compacted and you're not getting good infiltration. That water ultimately will start to converge. You can see that happening, for instance, here, and then over here, and over here. And once the water starts to converge, you get very small channels, which we call rills. Those rills can be 1, 2, maybe 3 inches deep. And ultimately, those rills, which you can see here, and here, and here, they start to converge into things we call gullies. And gullies, again, are typically once it's about 4 inches or deeper, we refer to that as a gully. So again, it starts up top, and it's really important to understand where it starts and how it evolves as it moves down the hillside. Here's a different view at that hillside. So up top, we might have some splash erosion or sheet erosion as it's moving down the hillside, not getting good infiltration. Ultimately, when we have a drop in that elevation, that's what we refer to as a head cut or a nick point. And if we aren't addressing this key area right here effectively, what's going to happen is that water is going to keep moving down, and it's going to keep slicing and slicing. So this head cut is going to move uphill and just continue to bite away at your hillsides. When we look at this slide, I really want to highlight a tendency that so many people have. They see this gully, they see this head cut and this big gully forming, and they say, oh gosh, that thing is ugly, that looks wrong, we need to do something. But so often what we do is we focus on the symptom and not the problem. And so for example, with a situation like this, you might have a landowner decide, well, clearly something bad is happening down there and we need to do something about it. So they might throw a couple of wood pallets or perhaps some cedar logs down below. If they've got a few truck tires laying around, they might throw a few of those down too. But again, without understanding that whole process of erosion, what's happening at the top in terms of splash erosion, sheet erosion, rills and gullies, if we're just focused on the symptom and not the problem, ultimately we're not going to be effective, and perhaps we can make things even worse. And so my hope today is that you start to think about some of these hillside dynamics, phenomenon of erosion more holistically, and go out and look at your property a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about a few of the strategies for how we can slow and sink water, and in so doing, reduce erosion, build up our soils and our plant communities, and start to address some of those larger things like droughts and floods and feeding our spring-fed creeks and rivers. So we'll start out with some simple strategies, and then we'll get into some more advanced strategies after that. So one of the easiest things we can do is we can use rocks that are already laying around on our properties to build rows along our hillsides. If you've got a large family and kids and grandkids with strong backs, they can move large rocks for you. Or if you've got volunteers. What this landowner did out in Bandera is she took a rock rake and in an afternoon raked up these small rocks. You can see the ball cap there for scale. Small rocks that she raked up into several rows going down the hillside. And you'll notice that yellow sort of wavy line going across the screen. What she did was she built these rows of rocks following the contour lines along her hillside. And what those rocks did was they slowed water down so that water started to deposit soil. This was just a bare ground caliche hillside. And just with these small rows of rocks built along the contours of her hillsides, she was able to slow and sink water, catch enough soil that she started to have muley and several other species of native bunch grasses established on their own. She didn't even have to seed. This happened just by slowing and sinking water. And it's not perfect. The site isn't perfect by any means, but it's moving in the right direction. This is that same landowner in Bandera, a different part of her property. In addition to using rows of rocks, she's also used rows of cedar logs. Oftentimes we'll see a landowner remove a bunch of cedar or ash juniper on their property, and then they burn up all that woody material. That woody material can be a great resource, especially in the context of hillside stewardship. Here the landowner has done a few things. She's created not one, but several rows of logs. You'll notice with these wavy lines that she's found the contour lines on the hillside and followed them to build these rows of logs. There are several of them. Typically, if you just build one, it's not going to be very effective. But if you can start to build 2 or 3 or even 4 rows of logs, they're going to reinforce one another. So she built this series of logs. In this instance, she did broadcast some native seed. And then she took some of the mulch from the cedar management and sprinkled it on top of the seed. And this was yet another bare ground caliche hillside where we're starting to see a lot of vegetation develop, again, by slowing and sinking that water. So I've mentioned the contour lines, and some of you might say, okay, that's great, but how the heck do I do that? Well, for those of you who are golfers and are really good at reading the green, perhaps you can do that with your naked eye. But for the rest of us, to really identify those contour lines, we usually have to use something called a laser level, which you can see here on the right. This equipment is not inexpensive, and so there's a few options. One is if you have some neighbors or some family who are all interested in these types of stewardship techniques, you can pull your funding together to purchase one. Or you can look up your local U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service agent, schedule a site visit with them, and more than likely they will have a laser level device. During that site visit, they can come out with you and flag those contour lines to help you find the best place to put those rows of logs or rows of rocks. Another simple option that you can do is to use mulch or slash or chippings from cedar management. When using this, it's similar, again, like a gardener might use mulch to cover their bed. You do not want to put down more than, say, 3 inches of cedar slash. When you start to put out more than 3-4 inches of cedar slash, it's going to really slow down the germination of some of your grasses and can take a long time for that material to break down. So this is a great method, but again, try to keep it to a very thin protective layer on the soil. So those were the basic strategies. Now we're going to get into the advanced ones. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that I'm going to throw some very weird words, some terms that we don't throw around in the hill country at y'all. Some of these practices are not intuitive, and frankly, I'm still trying to make sense of some of them myself. So don't expect that it's going to be crystal clear the first go round, but my hope is just to expose you to some new ideas, to expand your toolbox, and we can explore some of these things in the discussion and then afterwards. But these are some really cool things that folks have been doing in New Mexico and Utah and Montana and Colorado for years, and are still pretty new and novel for us here in the Hill Country. The first strategy we're going to talk about is called a rock rundown. A rock rundown is a structure that we would use to stabilize that head cut. Again, a head cut is where we've got that drop in elevation, and we start to see water coming down and cutting into the hillside, and that head cut is working further and further up the hill. And so what we want to do with the rock rundown is find a way to keep this from happening. We don't want the hillside to get eaten up by erosion. We want to stabilize this area right here. And so one of the ways that we can do that is with a rock rundown structure. So here is a picture. I apologize, this is a little fuzzy, but this is an example of a head cut. We've got a hill, gradual hill coming down, and then we've got a drop in elevation of several feet. You can see bare ground throughout here, and this is a head cut. And so when we build a rock rundown, what we're trying to do is create a nice gentle slope where, as the name would suggest, the water, instead of sort of racing down the hillside and continuing to eat away at this top portion of the head cut, is running slowly and gradually over the lip of the structure and moving down the hill. And so again, here is the head cut. And now I'm going to show you pictures of this rock rundown being built. So yeah, here's the drop in elevation that you can see. It's fairly sizable. So with the rock rundown, what you want to do is you want to take rocks and fit them snugly together so that they are filling in this head cut. What's really important is that the rocks on the top side are fitting snugly against the slope here, which is to say they're not protruding 5-6 inches above the ground, but they're sort of creating a nice smooth path down that feature. And you're using rocks, use what you've got. If you have angular rocks, they're going to fit together better than, say, round rocks, but use what you've got. And ideally, you can use rocks like we're doing here in a way that fit together really snugly. And here's the final product. You can see these rocks, they're angular, they're fitting together pretty well with minimal space in between. And you have a smooth path where that water that's coming down the hill is now going to run down these rocks, slowed down, losing a lot of energy, depositing soil. What the landowner did here is they not only created this rock structure, but because they have lots of livestock, they then added a lot of cedar slash on top of the structure just to deter any livestock from moving along and potentially destabilizing this structure. So again, this is called a rock rundown, and it's a structure that is built to stabilize those vulnerable head cuts. Now I'm going to show you a diagram for those folks who see and understand these things better from a profile like this, to show you what a typical rock rundown structure might look like. So again, here's the hillside. We've got water coming down. You've got the drop in elevation. This is the head cut or the nick point, and water moving down. This green here is to symbolize that you might have some existing vegetation growing on the landscape. That vegetation, through its root system and the biomass above ground, is your best friend in terms of stabilizing the soil. So whenever we're building these structures, to the extent possible, we want to leave existing vegetation intact. It's going to help us out a whole bunch. So typically when building a rock rundown structure, what we're going to do is we actually are going to move a little bit of soil. Rather than having this dramatic drop in elevation, we want to create a much gentler slope here. What we then do is we want to use a very large set of rocks that we dig through a small trench into the ground so that they're anchored and fairly flush, maybe an inch or two above the ground at the base of the structure. Then we're going to take those rocks, ideally angular, but if we don't have angular rocks and all we have is round rocks, use what you've got. You're going to put those up the slope, again, fitting well together. And then that header rock at the top of the feature, we want it to be flush with the ground so that the water isn't hitting this and bouncing off it. But again, it just as the name would suggest, it's running down and slowing through that feature through the process. What the landowner and Bandera also did, again, these structures can reinforce one another, is they created several rows of rocks above the rock rundown so that water, again, is being slowed and sunk into the ground so that whatever is still flowing down, there's less of it, it's less erosive, not putting as much pressure on this sensitive spot here. So again, that's the rock rundown, and it's used to stabilize a head cut feature like this. All right, we're gonna go on to the next one. The next structure we can use is to create a system of berms and swales. These are two different examples. One over here is in Blanco, the other down here is in Bandera. And in both instances, the landowners have created a series of berms and swales. So by creating the swale, you're essentially digging a very wide ditch, and then you can use that soil to create the berm. And so both of these landowners have created multiple sets of berms and swales. This landowner then broadcasts some cover crop seeds and some native grasses, and then put some straw on top of it. And when built and sited correctly, berms and swales can slow and store and sink tremendous amounts of water. But these are also complex structures. And the steeper the slope, the more rainfall you get, the higher the risk. And so if you're going to think about creating a swale and a berm, there's some math that goes into it. And you might think about consulting a professional if you're going to build some of these structures. So we've now talked about two structures. We talked about the rock rundown, which is used to stabilize that nick or that head cut on the hillside. We talked about berms and swales, which can store and sink tremendous amounts of water into the ground. The third one that we're going to talk about is something called a media luna. Now, a media luna has a different objective than the two previous methods. A media luna, when it's oriented in this way, is designed to take concentrated flows of water, slow them down, and spread them out. And so what we see here, this is the arrow. It's not totally obvious, but we have some concentrated water being channeled down this hillside. This media luna, notice how the tips are facing up like a smiley face, is designed so that the middle or the bottom of that feature is aligned with that concentrated flow. And what happens is when the water hits this feature, it's slowed down, it's going to deposit the sediment, and then water is going to be spread out across that field, which is great for spreading moisture and, again, taking concentrated flows and putting it out in sort of a more even sheet flow. So that's a media luna. Again, new terms, things we probably have never heard before, but again, just trying to provide some exposure to some new tools, which we can talk about in a few minutes. The last one, perhaps in my mind the most complex, is something called a Zuni bowl. A Zuni bowl is similar to a rock rundown in that we're trying to stabilize a dramatic head cut on the landscape. So here, water is coming down this hillside. It is being funneled through this pipe under that walking trail and then down the hill. And there is a dramatic amount of erosion happening here. So a Zuni bowl is designed to address this head cut feature. And similar to a rock rundown, sometimes it can warrant having to move a little bit of soil so that you're creating a gentler slope. Notice how these are pretty steep banks right here. And so in this case, what some volunteers did was we took some shovels and we made the slopes on this head cut a little bit more gentle. One of the first things you do when you're building a Zuni bowl, just like with the rock rundown, is you want to take those big footer rocks and anchor them by digging a little trench and putting them well into the soil. Then above that, you build the pour over from which the pool can allow water to flow. And then, then you have this really gradual bowl feature that is built with rocks that are fit well into this gentler slope and into this, the top pour feature up here. And then below them, you have what's referred to as a one rock dam. These are rock structures which go across the width of the rill or gully or channel feature, so you don't just have water racing across the rocks and causing more erosion on the side. And these can complement each other well, but again, a more complicated strategy takes a little bit of math and perhaps some professional help to do. This is an example of a landowner who is a real go-getter and decided to do this with some help from her neighbors. What you see here is they were using shovels to make the slopes a little bit more gentle. Once they had some gentle slopes here, they built their Zuni bowl, and then they have their one rock dams below, again, helping to slow and sink that water and build up the sediment so that you're not having further channelization and down cutting with water that's coming down from the driveway. So I want to recap those advanced strategies. Again, the first time I heard these, I didn't even understand half the words that were being said to me, much less what their function was. We went through rock rundowns. Those are those structures that are being built on head cuts to stabilize them. We talked about berms and swales, which when sited and built appropriately can capture tremendous amounts of water. We talked about media lunas, which can take concentrated flows of water, slow them down, spread them across your pasture. And then these more complicated Zuni bowls, which when built with one rock dams, again, can really start to slow water and heal these channelized features on your property. Again, I myself am still figuring out some of these strategies. They're new to the hill country. Some of them are intricate and complicated. The good news is that there's a lot of great folks out there to help us figure out some of these strategies. Perhaps the best is the Quivira Coalition. They have some remarkable free electronic resources on their website that talk about these specific strategies, how to build and maintain your roads so that we're slowing and sinking water and not letting it race down the hillside. The National Center for Appropriate Technologies Soil for Water program has great resources, including a recent webinar on those guiding principles for soil health. They have lots of great resources for how to measure the health of your soil, whether that's through water infiltration like we're seeing here, or looking at the microorganisms in the soil. Great resources at the Soil for Water website. Again, if you're trying to build some of these structures and wanting to do so along those contour lines, your local USDA NRCS agent will probably have a laser level and be willing to help you during a site visit, identify and flag out those contour lines to help you in the design of some of these structures. There's a nonprofit called the Earth Repair Corps. They have their permaculture blitzes every year where they teach you how to read the landscape and how to build some of these structures in really great ways. If you want to start looking at the contour lines and the topography and start to understand your hillsides more holistically, the U.S. Geologic Survey and the Texas Forest Service have great mapping resources online where you can start to look at your property as well as properties above you to understand where and how water is coming down the hillside. And then of course the Hill Country Alliance, we have some great resources, which I will share with Becky afterwards, that go into more depth about some of these both basic and advanced strategies for slowing and sinking water. And again, when we can slow and sink water, there are so many benefits, not only to us and to our neighbors, but really everyone benefits. When we can slow and sink water, we're able to grow plants for wildlife and for livestock. We're going to mitigate flooding by slowing down that rainfall. We're going to trap sediment and reduce erosion, building up that sponge. When we build up that sponge, it's going to store water in the land. When we store that water in the land, it's going to recharge our groundwater and our aquifers. And again, given the connection between our groundwater and surface water, that's going to feed our creeks and rivers longer over time. So again, the hope that I listed at the beginning of this presentation was that you learn a new item or two, that tomorrow or the next day or maybe next week, you go out and look at your property a little bit differently. Think about erosion holistically, from that first raindrop to splash and sheet and rill and gully erosion. Think about the stressors. What might be causing erosion? Are there things you can do to manage that erosion, whether it's perhaps managing livestock differently, managing or maintaining the design of your roads a little differently, and start to think more about how we can slow and sink water down on our hillsides. I'm going to stop there. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to talk to you about erosion, soil health, some of these strategies. Really, wherever y'all want to go, this is your time. And yeah, I want this to be helpful and useful for y'all. How'd we do? We awake?
So any questions? I mean, we can open this up. You can unmute yourself, and we can do it that way rather than typing it in, because I see that we didn't have any questions typed in. So go ahead and feel free to ask your questions. I mean, Daniel is offered his time and expertise to us at this time, so let's take advantage of it, folks.
Daniel, can you hear
Yes,
me?
sir. Yes, sir.
You talked about using the contour lines and building the berms and swales there. What if you don't exactly follow the contour line, but basically follow the shape of the hill? Do you have to exactly follow the contour line is my question.
No, sir, you do not. I think you get some better efficiencies if you can follow those natural contour lines, but something is better than nothing, which is why, I said, you could go buy a bunch of rock if you really want, but I'm a fan of using what you got. So if you've got some cedar slash laying around and a few rocks, use what you got and do the best you can. If you wanted to increase the impact or the effectiveness of those structures, following those contour lines is definitely going to help, but it's not something you absolutely have to do. So you can still get good things done without being perfect. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Daniel, did in your research and talking with all of these other agents and stuff, in a real simple way, and tell me if I'm wrong, in trying to find the contour lines and stuff too, it's just taking a nice walk after we've had a pretty good rain, and where all of that, just the real fine chopped up leaves and things like that, they're going to leave, lines and that really do follow that natural contour. So
Becky, that is awesome advice. Yes, and get out not just after the rain, but during the rain.
mm-hmm.
Watch where and how that water is flowing, where it's sinking, where it's racing off your land. That's my best advice to you, is get out, walk your property, especially during that rain event. See where and how the water is flowing. Walk uphill, walk downhill, and repeat that cycle 10 more times before you start moving rock and soil and cedar slash. Really get to know that hillside intimately before you start thinking about what structure or sets of structures you want to start experimenting with.
Daniel,
I have a
this is
question.
Richard. I have a question about, how about along roadsides? I'm talking about ranch roads, not paved roads, but do you have any thoughts about that? And also managing, are you talking about berms across roads to help manage that coming down the road, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, my advice, if you go to the Quivira Coalition website, they have a phenomenal resource that's answers all of the questions you just talked about. Where to site and design a road, or if you've already got it built, how do you maintain it? How do you tweak it so that that road in and of itself is not causing erosion, but that it's melding into the landform in a way that helps slow and sink water? Absolutely. So there's things you can do within the confines of the road. There's things you can do adjacent to the road. And yes, the Quivira Coalition website. I've got the booklet somewhere, but it's the best thing I've seen on the topic.
Holly, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. In the case of a very sloped lot, rocky slope, would it be advantageous to not only slow the sheet erosion and splash, but maybe encourage one place, one rill, to be sort of a runoff? There's so much water coming down, a huge amount. Maybe encourage one gully, one rill, one gully.
That is definitely a strategy. So I was trying to keep this as high level, and because again, these are all new and funky and weird terms. So I tried to keep it somewhat simple and straightforward, but I'm gonna go back into the presentation. Oh, sorry, I gotta share my screen. Bear with me. So we talked about media lunas, but I only talked about them in one context. Whoops. Sorry, y'all. Which is when we have concentrated flows coming down and we want to spread it out. In your case, if you wanted, if the specifics of your property were such that it makes sense to do the opposite, where you want to concentrate the water so that you can then manage it better downhill once it's concentrated, you can actually use media lunas and do the opposite. If you flip the orientation of this so that instead of it being a happy face, it's sort of a sad face, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to take that diffuse flows or sheet flow, and then it's going to concentrate it coming out the other end. So obviously I've not been to your place. I don't know the specifics, but if that is something that you're trying to do to concentrate the flows, using that media luna instead of like a happy face, sad face, will take that sheet flow and then concentrate it to yeah.
Very interesting, thank you.
Yeah.
Daniel,
Yes, ma'am.
if you didn't want to wait after using one of these mitigation methods, if you didn't want to wait for the grasses to naturally begin to grow behind there, would it be okay to go ahead and seed those with the native grasses, or would they just immediately wash away?
Great. I am so glad you asked that. I totally forgot to talk about that in the presentation. So with each of those structures, like the rock rundown, where you've created this more gentle slope and you're placing all these rocks down that gentle slope, you can definitely toss seed down before you start putting all those rocks down. You can toss seed down on the bare ground, or once you put the rocks down, you can toss seed on top of the rocks and then put a little dirt on top of them. Absolutely, there is a place for doing seeding with each of these methods. So yes, thank you for asking that, and I'm sorry I didn't highlight that in a better manner earlier.
Mm-hmm. 。 Any other questions from anybody?
Well, I shared my contact information. I'm going to put it up one more time. If you have questions, if you have feedback, this is actually the first time I've given this presentation. If there were things you felt like, frankly, I didn't do a good job explaining, give me a call, send me an email. Would love to hear from y'all. And if there's any way that I can help y'all as you start to explore these strategies, please don't be shy. Get in touch with me. I'd love to learn along with y'all as we improve the health of our hillsides. So thanks.
Thanks, great job.
Thanks for joining, y'all.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. And you're always, you know, a delight to listen to and providing so much good information for everybody. So and Bob Hand with his little emoji hand, so that's wonderful. You had indicated you're going to go ahead and send me some information, and then perhaps I can post that with the recording. Is that my understanding, or?
Absolutely. I'm going to send you the part 1, the basics strategy. I can do that this week. And then I hope to send the more advanced stuff to you in a couple of weeks.
Great, great. So for those of you, if you may have missed out at the beginning, we went ahead and we did record this. It has to go through Zoom and such, but when that recording is ready, I will go ahead and it will be posted at the riversidenaturecenter.org website under our Learn With Us heading and in the video library. So feel free, if you wanted to go back and review it, do so there, and that will be the same site and location on our website that will post the information that Daniel will share with us as well. So fantastic. I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much, Daniel. And if we don't have any further questions, I'm going to go ahead and we'll start our virtual tour of the EduScape. Everybody's ready for that? Wonderful. So I'm going to share and all righty. As you tell, I'm not an expert at this, so right. Hold on one second, folks, because I am not seeing the screens and such. So
Do you have an AT code readily available for this presentation?
I don't have it exactly memorized, no, but it is on the Hill Country Master Naturalists calendar that we can go ahead and you can use that. Sorry, I should have memorized it, but I did not. I'm gonna stop sharing just for a second because I'm having just a little bit of technical issues here. And sorry, folks, just have to bear with me.
It's AT20-338 for the UGRA EduScape virtual talk and tour.
Yes.
Awesome, Barbara. Thank you.
AT20-338.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what you guys are seeing. Hopefully you're seeing it says UGR EduScape, And as you can tell, I am at this Zoom. We are going to marshal on and go through the virtual tour. If you, like I said before, if you haven't had an opportunity to go by the building on Lehman Street, I really do encourage you. You know, seeing it through the slides is one thing, but seeing it in person is a completely different and better experience. So, as I mentioned earlier, this project all began with a need to correct some major erosion and runoff issues around the UGRA building. Creating a landscape that served more than just aesthetics was very important to the folks. And so it needed to be a landscape with purpose. So as you can see, this all began in late 2016. And through, you know, development.
Becky, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you don't have your screen shared.
I do not.
No.
Well, it said it was shared, so I'm glad you interrupted. Thank you for doing that. Well, this is crazy because I did screen share and I pulled it up. So.
It did share for a moment.
Did it?
There it is.
Yep, there it is. So you just have to go to the PowerPoint view icon down at the bottom right, and it'll maximize it there. Way bottom right of your PowerPoint screen.
Dear, thank you. Okay.
Or that one works too. That.
All right. Okay.
Oh.
Oh,
there you go.
Sharing?
You got it. Yep, you've got it.
Okay. All right. So that was a little crazy, and I apologize for that. So y'all didn't miss any slides. So we're right on cue here. So anyway, as we were talking about this landscape was coined EduScape, and or an educational landscape. So within the redesigned landscape, and we're going to go over these, there are about 15 different water conservation practices that demonstrate how to alleviate stormwater runoff, as well as to do stormwater detention and water conservation practices. So all of this is to help balance out two extremes that we all know are very pervasive in an urban environment, and that's drought and flood. So based on the average rainfall over 1 year, it's estimated that the landscape around UGRA can absorb about 1 million gallons of rainwater. So that's pretty sizable. So one advantage of doing this tour through virtual is that we get to see before and afters. So this is prior to the redesign, and this is the entrance of the UGRA building. And then what we're seeing today. And all of these things, I'm just going to kind of go through them fast because we're going to discuss each one individually. So again, the parking lot before, and now what it looks like. And you can see some xeriscaping being done. Further down on the entrance before, and then now. Over to the side of the building before, and you can see again some xeriscape practices. This is in the back of the building, just lots of lawn before. And now look, it's again the back entrance before, and now after. And now we are at the beginning of the entrance into the parking lot. So actually this combination of practices, is not something that you would probably expect to find in a home or even, a single business. There's just a lot that's happening all at one time. But the core of the landscape is an educational demonstration. So, so by putting in all of these different practices in one, it's in hopes that people that are touring and looking at it will at least select one or two of the practices and then be able to implement that at either their home landscape or their businesses. So the first stop on our tour is the welcome sign. In all, there's 10 interpretive signs along the EduScape, and each one has a QR code you can see down at the bottom. So when you are touring the landscape, you can use your cell phone, look up the QR code, and it has further information about each of the signs. So then we go to the next interpretive sign, which is featuring the Guadalupe River. And of course, we're going to start our tour on focusing on the Guadalupe River, because this is one of our primary education objectives, is to build awareness of the unique relationship between Kerr County and the Guadalupe River. We're lucky to have the headwaters of the river in the western part of Kerr County. And so the intersection of geology and topography is responsible for the flow of the river that we rely on for healthy recreation, water supply, and aquatic life. You can see here that there's a watershed map on the interpretive sign, and here's a better up close look at that. And what the importance of this is to be able to map out the kind of your address, and so that you have sort of a river or watershed address, knowing that it's just a better idea and understanding of your connection with your property, the land in full, and all the creeks, everything that contribute down into the river, and knowing this is helpful in then discussing situations such as pollution and also flooding. So if you can find your area on this map, know your watershed address. So the next thing we see is this artificial stream. It's nice and it's aesthetically pleasing, but it also serves a purpose. I mean, it's demonstrating how many of our creeks and above ground water begin as seeps and springs. And so the groundwater is pushed up through the rocks, and it starts to flow on the surface. So again, it's just a nice reminder. So this is sort of the beginning. We're going to get on this crushed granite path. And the first thing that we really do notice is this big rainwater tank right here. This is a 30,000 gallon storage tank. It fulfills both water conservation practices, but also stormwater detention practices. It drains about 10,000 square feet of the roof, which is approximately half of the building. And, rainwater harvesting you can have a huge system like we're viewing right here. And then we can also have, very small systems that may only incorporate a 50-gallon barrel and capturing, roof off just a small shed. And we're gonna see that very same thing up when we come up around the corner. So, you need to remember that rainwater harvesting can be scaled to your needs and your purposes. It doesn't have to be, one or the other, as we're saying here. In this case, what's happening is that they're diverting water from that's coming off the roof from running down into the parking lot and beyond by storing it here in these tanks and then using it later for irrigation. The irrigation system that is working off of this tank is a series of drip lines and low flow spray heads. So currently drawing, you know, from this tank, but when this tank is empty, which it can be, they do have the ability to draw from city water supplies. So you're seeing here, again, the interpretive sign that's talking about rainwater harvesting. And I have to do a little plug for Riverside Nature Center, because if you see these, the blue barrels hooked up in tandem, those are barrels that we have at the Nature Center, and they're off a very small roof. And what that is that's allowing us to have water available for our compost system that we have, the soil factory back in the back part of the property. So we're going to now stroll on up away from the tank and coming up around to the side of the building, and you're going to see these plantings of native grasses here. And you know, native grasses such as the muleys that you see and little blue stem, you know, all very deep rooted. So they play their part in helping water infiltrate in through the soil down and keeping the soil where it needs to be. So we're going to move on up, and here we're walking across a new surface, but we're going to talk about surfaces in just a minute. And so over to our right, we noticed this little shed, and we had talked about, you know, rainwater harvesting can be done on a small scale. And as you can see, the small shed, the water is being diverted with a rain chain down into a 55-gallon drum, which then can also be used for, you know, hand watering and such in those areas. So quite useful and easy to implement in your own landscape. So this leads us up to the next interpretive sign talking about Texas wildflowers. And again, you know, as in the grasses and such, wildflowers play, you know, a really, really vital role in soil health as well. And you can see this mulched walkway through this pollinator garden here, which was developed and is maintained by our Hill Country Master Naturalists. This is a work in progress. As in wildflower or pollinator garden is. You can see right now a lot of grass cover in there. And if we look now at current pictures, we're more, you know, using mulch as the ground cover and highlighting a lot of different pollinator friendly plantings. So just a couple more pictures showing you up close and then over to the side, all of these wonderful plantings. So the landscape has been, especially the pollinator garden and such, has been you know, recognized as a monarch way station, as well as a National Wildlife Federation wildlife habitat. The overall landscape, the EduScape, received in 2018 this very prestigious award. Was recognized by the Texas Water Development Board as a Texas Rain Catcher Award. And this is a nod to the educational and outreach activities of the Upper Guadalupe River Authority. So good for them. Again, just some more pollinator plants that are in the landscape. So this leads us to our next sign, talking about pervious surfaces. So we had talked about, you saw a different surface earlier, and I said we'd get to it. So here we are. we have come up a crushed granite at the beginning, and then we went over some pavers. But the thing to note about the pavers is that they are not mortared, and so the rain is able to easily, infiltrate down through between the cracks. So here we've got a combination of turf stone pavers and gravel. And so this makes this walkway, very obviously very pervious, meaning that water can infiltrate, as opposed to the roadway that we use the term impervious, which, obviously it's obstructing any infiltration of that water. We can only expect that the impact that impervious cover, has on our waterways is going to increase in the future. And so, although we have, this really wonderful small town feel here in Kerrville, there's no data or metrics or anything to say that we're not going to, continue to grow. So by utilizing things like this here with the turf stone pavers and gravel, you don't have to put gravel in between. People will oftentimes have vegetative matter that is growing in the turf stone, and so increasing that pervious cover, little by little is, extremely important in our community. And so, hopefully folks will see this, find it not only useful, but also aesthetically pleasing, and will implement them in their strategies of their landscape. So also you'll find along the way, most of the plants have been labeled, and you will also find about 20 different water conservation tip signs that are throughout the landscape. So here we are on the back end of the building. And what you want to note here is the slope. So just a little bit on the slide, a little bit to the right is, Lehman Drive. From the road down to the building, we've got a 20-foot drop. So you can only imagine that when, there's a really good rain, that slope, where, especially as it was before, where there was no interruption whatsoever, was a great impact. It was just, running down and then crashing into the side of the building. So, some of the features that help alleviate that acceleration of the water here are the terracing that we see, as well as the grasses, and then we're going to talk about this the large stones and the dry creek bed that's along the back of the building. And what this dry creek bed does is it funnels the rain to either side of the building, rather than just having it, just come in and kind of do like we talked about in Daniel's presentation, doing that head cut, against a thing. So we have somewhere with the interpretive sign, interesting. And one thing too is that if you go and you visit UGRA's website, there, and you go and under their major initiatives and you find EduScape, you can also read these signs there, and there are links to additional information. So don't forget that you can always go back and read these, because there's a lot of really good information on these interpretive signs, or better yet, go and read them in person. So the dry creek bed it offers a way to control that runoff, and it guides it towards the rain garden. So when I said it was, diverting the rain from the back of the building to either side, those are then going in these pathways, these dry creek beds, and then down into the rain gardens. Now, even though there's all of these stormwater, retention features with the rain gardens, the terraces, dry creek bed, mulch, rain tanks, sometimes even during, these intense rainfalls that we get, and it's not uncommon, when it exceeds, an inch an hour. All of these still, unfortunately, will become overwhelmed, and we're going to see it right here. This was in May of last year when we had those torrential rains, and you can see that, even with all of the features, it just wasn't able to, soak in fast enough. And so you can see here again, just that accumulation of rain during that. And, what my take on this is, you design it as best you can to alleviate, what's most commonly going to occur. We don't always have these downpours. And so, you have to kind of take the good and the bad with it. So we're going to go back up onto the road and follow our path. Now we're back on a crushed granite surface. And you can see the before and the after. Spring of 2019, just last year, which was really the first year that the landscape was planted, to what it looks like today. So you can, see how that spreading of the plants and the plantings are really going to help not divert, but slow down that water, and as opposed to just, the new plants. So they're doing quite well. Some more showing how things have just really, really grown up, during this full season. So what we see here is a little xeriscaping that was developed kind of as a succulent garden. That we've got a trellis to the side for some coral honeysuckle that's growing up on it. The Spanish dagger in the background has been there for quite a long time, and this is probably the hottest and intense area on the property. And so things are doing well, even in all of this heat and direct sun. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the turf grass plots that have been implemented throughout the landscape. There are 4 of them, and what we're looking at right here is we have the buffalo grass and the Bermuda, which is along the straightaway. And so it's a combination. We have buffalo grass, Bermuda, Tiff-Tuff Bermuda, St. Augustine, which we've passed back where the rain chain was, and the garden, the rain barrel. And then also there is zoysia grass as turf grass. Some people, we want to talk about, water conservation, and they say, why are you, even talking about, turf grass? Why would you want people to, plant turf grass? And it's not that we're saying that, yeah, you need a lawn, far from it. But I think that, knowing that there are more drought tolerant and less water thirsty grasses out there is important. And people, if you want to be able to walk out in your backyard and put your toes in the grass and have, your grandkids and your kids, have a place to play, then by all means, but you can drastically reduce the size and not have such a monoculture of a lawn, but have patches. And so that's primarily, the demonstration here is highlighting, specific turf grasses that do well in our region and are very water wise in using that. So we're going to come around the corner and we're going to come up to the interpretive sign talking about condensate collection. This is a really cool concept here, and one that, again, sort of like the rain harvesting, you can have the Mac Daddy system, or you can have, you know, something very small. Condensate is, you know, really neat here in Texas. Here we are having, you know, these hot days in the summer, and that's when most of our plants and things need the water the most. So what we do is we collect the water that's coming off our air conditioning units. And so therefore, it's obviously we're running the air conditioning more during the summer. So when we're running it more, it's producing more condensate, we're collecting more. So, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship in a sense. And this particular tank here at UGRA is a 3,000 gallon tank, and it collects it off the rooftop air conditioning units. And I don't know if you're aware, but Peterson Regional Medical Center had, when they did their renovations and such, they did put in condensate collection. They are able to store up to 90,000 gallons of water just from collected from their air conditioning units. And we are being told that facility's units generate about 400,000 gallons of water per year. So, you know, good from them that it's just not, you know, going to waste, that they do their irrigation with that water, as does the Kroc Center. They collect and divert about 130,000 gallons. No, they can collect 130,000 gallons in their catchment system. And they are estimating that during the peak of the summer, their system is creating about 2,500 gallons a day. So, you know, again, way to think forward, and both the Kroc Center and Peterson. But, you know, you can do this yourself. I mean, with a simple little 5-gallon bucket underneath your condensate drip, and, you know, just collect that and use that to hand water. You can also, you know, put it into a system like this. But so going from a very, you know, intricate system as regional Peterson, a 5-gallon bucket. So it's quite doable. So rain gardens, and right before that saw the rain garden, but again, this is a system, a technique that can be used to keep water from running off into the streets, especially. You know, you see rain gardens a lot along, you know, right in kind of that median for roadways. Rain gardens are smaller, and we're going to talk further when we get around the corner. We're going to talk about, you know, berms and swales a little bit. And so those are rain gardens on a much larger scale. So this is the rain garden right there at the condensate collection. We've got Cenizo, you have, you know, mealy blue sage, as well as some sea oats there. All of these plants have something, you know, in common. They don't mind having their roots wet for a short period of time and then dry out. And that's what's real important with rain gardens, is that your selection of plants. You wouldn't want to use Blackfoot daisies here because they cannot stand to have their feet wet, so they would not do well. But there's quite a bit of information and suggested plants specifically for rain gardens that is available out there. So xeriscaping, actually, we've been looking at xeriscaping throughout this entire tour. All of the different techniques, are part of the xeriscape concept. So some of the other less known or talked about ideas with xeriscaping are things like using artificial flowers or metal, flowers. You just kind of yard art. I mean, obviously, they're not needing water to thrive. You could say that they do need water because you do have to kind of hose them off every once in a while to keep them looking nice. But this is, a real simple way to have a splash of color and some, just brighten up an area without having to actually, put in live vegetation. So as we come around the corner, more xeriscaping, the use of the crushed granite and then larger stones kind of give it some interest. And then cactus and yuccas in this area. If you remember from way back, we had at the beginning, you could see all the boxwoods that were along the front of the building. This is what they replaced them with. And it's just, this is a plant called Candlia, I'm sorry. And just, kind of illustrating how you can have container gardening in your landscape as well. Now, this antique rose garden is protected. It's behind a fence, a gate, so the deer do not get to browse on that. But it's quite zen when you get to kind of hang out in that area. So moving towards the front of the building, again, we're seeing this is back towards the plantings were done in more linear fashion, kind of with that institutional feel. This was an earlier picture, and now you can see now how it's really filled in. Again, plantings like this, diverting the water from, having such a hard, straight down onto the ground and causing erosion. It's softening that as well as, allowing some infiltration. This is the top of the terrace. And as you can see here, this gabion wall, is forming the terrace along that area. And then this is what it looks like now. And so, the wall is actually being, kind of covered with the plants, and it's a very organic, process. But it's allowing, the deeper soils, keeping that water right there and allowing it to infiltrate down. And then it comes down through the rocks, through the gabion walls, and then it's much slower rate to go to that next terraced level. So really kind of cool technique that can be utilized in a lot of different situations. So as we see here, this is kind of just a bird's eye view of the landscape. And you can see from the back, that's the Lehman Road up in the back. And you'll see how the water travels down, and hitting the back of the thing, back of the building, going through the dry creeks and then ending up in the rain gardens. So we still have, quite a bit of flow though that's going down along the side of the property and pass into the parking lot. And so in an attempt to capture even more of this flow and keeping it on property, UGRA partnered with Cork County, and they helped construct what we were talking about earlier, in an elongated dry creek bed and then rain garden And this is where it's, the rain garden is also called a bioswale. So this is where it allows all of that runoff to absorb directly, into these areas, keeping it from running off onto the adjacent properties. So again, partnering with Kerr County to build the trench, to dig the trench, and then the actual construction of the bioswale was done by Travis Fluhop. He is the owner of Beyond Irrigation here in Kerrville, and he is actually going to be our next speaker on September 1, and he's going to be talking about irrigation, the best management practices. Hopefully you can tune into that as well. So Travis, what he did is he layered, had layers of sand and gravel were added to that excavated trench, and then with mulch, you can see there on mulch on top of that. So what we have, we're seeing on the left, the dry creek bed, and then that funneling the water down into the planted rain garden. So this has been planted. It will, continue to grow and flourish just like the other parts of the landscape have. This is relatively new. So that concludes our tour today. I do want to, invite you again to actually come and see the landscape in person. It's a work in progress, and so anytime you're dealing with nature, gardening, and things of that, it's always going to change, and it's going to change seasonally. So, you can make a point of coming and seeing it throughout the year, and it'll obviously look different. So stop by, and I keep saying on Lehman Drive, but the UGRA building, it's 125 Lehman Drive, if you didn't know that. And just give a plug, I talked about on September 1 is our next EduScape Talk and Tour. And that topic, as I said, is irrigation, best management practices. And then on September 15th, we're going to have Billy Niffen, who is Texas's rainwater guru and water specialist. He's going to be talking about roof-reliant landscaping. And then on September 29th, we're going to have Dr. Becky Bowling from Texas A&M AgriLife, and she's going to come and talk to us about soil management. So if you're seeing, we're still in August, but September, we've got a lot of different talks because we have dubbed September to be EduScape month. So I hope all of you will continue to, tune in and join us. If you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have about the landscape. And if I can answer them, I will definitely try. Yep, no questions? Okay. Oh, Holly has a question. Okay.
Thanks so much. It's remarkable what y'all are doing with UGRA around that building, and then providing this as a community resource is incredible. So thanks for what y'all are doing.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been really simple for them to have just, said, we just need to, address the irrigation, the erosion, and, put in, some mitigating factors. But yeah, this was a real, huge project, and one that was done very well, and UGRA and the master gardeners and the master naturalists all, coming together, and it's turned into such a wonderful community project. So if there are no further questions, I thank you again for attending today, and hopefully we will see you again on September 1st. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out. Thank you, one and all.